Welcome to the Travelman Podcast. My name is Ben and I host this cool travel podcast. If you're joining me for the first time, then I say thanks a bunch for listening. On today's amazing episode, I'll be bringing you the long-awaited Melbourne travel guide. This will be different because this episode not only features me talking about my favourite parts of Melbourne, but also a Melbourne tour guide's view on Melbourne. Ben Oliver is a guide, and he'll be joining me from Drinking History Tours, and we'll be talking about Melbourne, all things to do, all things to eat and see, everything about Melbourne. So sit back and enjoy. Ben and I talk about Melbourne. I'd like to also mention that this will be part one of a two-part Melbourne Guide special. Thank you. G'day, Ben. Thanks for joining me today, mate.
G'day, Ben. How you going, mate?
Well, very well, very well. We're here to talk about the Melbourne Travel Guide, or the Insider's Guide of Melbourne. So it's very exciting. I've been wanting to do this for so long.
Yes, we've been we've had a few hits and misses over the last couple of weeks, but we got there eventually, mate.
Yeah, we did. So that's good. I finally got you on. How about we start with the first question, because I know personally the things that I like to see and do in Melbourne, but I'd like to know what you think are some of the best things that you personally would advise probably a traveller to Melbourne to see or do, or also what you enjoy.
Yeah, sure. It's a funny one, Melbourne, because I lived here since 2005, and I suppose unlike other major cities where there's an obvious landmark to sort of go to as a tourist, Melbourne's one of those cities where it's the sum of its parts kind of add up to being greater than the whole. So I think, unlike going to a place like Sydney where there's the obvious ones to go to, the best things about Melbourne are the places that are hidden away and a little bit harder to find. I like to almost compare Melbourne and Sydney. They're a little bit like Madrid and Barcelona. Barcelona is easy because you kind of know where to go, but with Madrid you really need to hunt down the best places to go to, and it kind of makes the whole experience that much more rewarding. So for me, when I first arrived in Melbourne in 2005, the best thing for me was just to hit the streets of the city and just discover and explore the laneways. I think it's almost nice to do it without a map and just walk your way through, and you never know what you're going to stumble across. And then once you're sort of done exploring on your own, then go back and then look up the laneways that I suppose Melbourne is most famous for, places like ACDC, Duckboard, Myers Place, of course the famous Hosier Lane, if you didn't already tick them off before. But I think part of the fun of Melbourne is that discovery element and not exactly knowing what you're going to stumble across. But I think, and then of course in the laneways hide this treasure trove of fantastic street art and amazing little tucked away bars and cafes and restaurants. And I think it's the lifestyle element down those laneways that's always been the thing that really drew me to Melbourne and made me fall in love with the city.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. I like that you mentioned the little bars and so forth, because I would have said this in the introduction, but you are a tour guide for Drinking History Tours, and I was going to say I did a tour of yours, which was hosted by Corinne.
Karina, that's right. Yep, Little Pocket Rocket,
and that was fantastic.
Great.
I went to some places I've never been to in Melbourne before, even some little laneways, and all those bars were new to me.
Fantastic, yeah. And I suppose, to give your listeners some background, I was a tour guide in Europe with a company called Bus About, which is basically 18, well, they say 18 plus, but it's really kind of 18 to 25-year-olds on a bus around Europe. And I did that for a little while. Then I came back to Melbourne and I worked for a free walking tour company for about 5 years, and then started Drinking History Tours a couple of years ago. And the idea behind the company is that I guess to summarise it really simply, the tours are more fun than a walking tour and classier than a bar crawl. So we wanted to create a bar tour that didn't go to the obvious kind of big pub kind of venues. And look, I love places like the Duke and the Young and Jackson, but they're kind of obvious and everyone knows where they are. So we wanted to show people those hidden fun laneway bars that I was exposed to when I first came to Melbourne. But then at the same time, we want to give people a sense of context and history about the place. And, on the city tour that you did, we talk a lot about the alcoholic influences in Melbourne. And there's a lot of, when you start digging into the history of Melbourne, it's the DNA of Melbourne has been soaked in alcohol from a very early age. Our first mayor was a brewer. We were founded by a drunkard and a pub owner. The first council meeting was held inside a pub. The legal drinking age in Melbourne until 1906 was 3 years old, if you can believe it. So there's just some really interesting stories about Melbourne that relate to alcohol. And I guess wanting to take the bars we've partnered with. I guess in the early days, I was approaching bars and sort of begging them to be part of the concept, and they kept. I had quite a few bars say, "Look, we just don't work with pub crawlers." So that was like pulling my hair out, saying, "We're not a pub crawl. Like we're different." And then once they got the idea of the concept, we started really getting a lot more bars on board. And like you say, I mean, we hope that if we get locals coming on the tours, that they won't have been to some of these places. And that's half the fun, acting like a tourist in your own backyard.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, I totally get where you're going there. Some things I really enjoy about Melbourne, obviously, like you mentioned, the laneways of Melbourne, the little bars and so forth. What do you think of Chinatown?
Yeah, look, I love Chinatown. I mean, Melbourne has the distinction of having the world's second oldest Chinatown, just behind San Francisco, although technically ours is the longest continuous Chinatown due to the San Francisco earthquake in the early 20th century. So we are technically the longest in the world continuous dating. I think, when was Chinatown? 1855, I think. You'll probably get one of your listeners correcting me on that date, but it's around about the early 1850s Chinatown kicked off. I would say that Chinatown, it's one of my favourite places for a late night feed. I mean, some of the best dumplings in the city. I mean, places like Shandong Mama are a must-do for dumplings. Hutong dumplings is another great recommendation. There's another fantastic restaurant in Chinatown called China Red. And the thing I love about these guys is you sit down and they've got computer monitors and you don't have to talk to anyone. You can just simply sit down, key in the food and drinks you want. The waiters bring it to you. You ask for the bill through the computer and then you leave again. It's the most seamless, quick experience. And the food is really, really good as well. So, look, I think if you come from another city where there is a Chinatown, and, I've been to Chinatowns in Singapore and London, and I wouldn't say Melbourne's Chinatown is drastically different from those Chinatowns. But I think if you do come from a place where you perhaps haven't been to a Chinatown before, then I think Melbourne is certainly one of the world's better Chinatowns. And it's also very easy to explore. I mean, basically Chinatown is just one long strip down Little Bourke Street. And then, of course, all the little laneways and so forth that come off Little Bourke Street. And it's, besides the food, I mean, again, me being a professional barfly, some of the best bars in the city. What are some good recos? Places like Berlin Bar. Have you been to Berlin Bar in Chinatown?
I don't think I have been. I haven't really done the bars of Chinatown. I've more so, done the restaurants, like a couple that I enjoy are Ant's Bistro, Empress of China.
Yep.
So, yeah, the bars I haven't really done. I should check them out.
Yeah, I mean, I was Berlin Bar is one of those fun ones, particularly Berlin if you're a Melbourne local and you've got a friend in from town and you want to show off just how cool and unique and hipster Melbourne is. So you go to this bar, Berlin Bar, and you have to knock on the door and they have to kind of let you in. So there's almost like a Stasi security detail at the front.
Wow.
And they let you in and then you walk in and then half the bar is West Berlin and half the bar is East Berlin. And West Berlin is all decadent and kind of 80s wealth. And then East Berlin is like military checkpoints and camouflage and you're sitting on army crates. And it's it's a bit kitsch, like I think as a local, you're not really going to go there that often, but it's a really fun bar to take out of towners too and just kind of show off how cool and funky Melbourne is.
Whereabouts is it and what part?
So Berlin Bar, God, I'm actually going to struggle on the street name now. It's look, I think if you Google Berlin Bar, it's pretty much smack bang in the middle of Chinatown, between Little Bourke Street and Lonsdale Street. Yeah, it's I've actually forgotten the name of the street. God, some tour guide I am.
Side street,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and look, most of the good bars in Chinatown are off little side streets. Places like Section 8, which is another fantastic bar.
I love Section 8.
Which is off,
it's my favourite.
Yeah, just off Tattersall's Lane.
Yes.
Sorry, Berlin Bar. I just remembered it's on Cause Lane, which is a little bit back from Tattersall's. Cause Lane. So definitely check out Berlin Bar. And another bar I'd probably recommend to check out. It's actually just opened about 6 months ago, called Bar Clara, which is a new cocktail bar that's opened up in Chinatown. And I suppose Melbourne's bars are going more towards the wine bar sort of scene, or those sort of like container sort of style craft beer kind of gardens. But there aren't a lot of new cocktail bars opening up in the city, and Bar Clara is one of the sort of real unashamedly dedicated to cocktails. And it's really cute. I met the owner, Joel, just the other day, and he's a lovely guy. And it's cool to see these like small independent bars that aren't part of big chains giving it a crack. But anyway, long story short, Chinatown is a little jewel box of some really, really cool little tucked away bars. It's a fun place to explore.
Cool. All right. No, that's fair enough. Yeah, I think every visitor that comes to Melbourne should definitely go check out Chinatown. A couple of places that I reckon the traveller should check out definitely is the Royal Botanic Gardens of Victoria. That would be my favourite open botanic garden with its tropical glass house and awesome lawns to relax on and stuff like that. That's I reckon that's one of the things that you do. Maybe you've had a few beers and you want to relax on the lawns. Obviously not with the alcohol, but yeah.
Well, look, I think if you won't tell anyone, I won't tell anyone. Technically. Technically speaking, you're not supposed to have open containers inside the botanical gardens. But let's be honest though, it's one of life's great pleasures to take a six pack into the botanical gardens with some food and chill out. I love it. And the other thing I'd say with the botanical gardens is that they have the Moonlight Cinema, which takes place over summer, and it's a brilliant. I mean, it obviously depends what time you're in town, but it runs from, I've got to get my dates right, it's kind of November through to about March-ish, but if you Google Moonlight Cinema Royal Botanical Gardens, you'll see the listing dates, and they basically have a giant inflatable screen. You can bring your own chairs and food and so forth. There's drinks there you can purchase and food you can purchase, much like the cinema, where there's like a gold class section, you can upgrade to like a gold class section of the Royal Botanical Gardens Moonlight Cinema. So it's one of our favourite things to do in the summertime is go there and watch a movie, and if it's a nice warm night, you got a bottle of wine and cheese board. It's a fantastic night.
Yeah, that's really nice. Another good night is what is it that the National Gallery of Victoria do? They do kind of like a jazz or drinks and food night or something. I forget what it's called, but I don't know. It's through the summer, because through the winter they got the winter masterpieces, which is always brilliant. I always go every winter, check out what's come to Melbourne, what great art's come to Melbourne. But in relation to Australian art and Aboriginal art, it's pretty good. Yeah,
so they do. The NGV does the Friday nights, and they're always a little bit different. Nights. Yeah. So at the moment they're running it through till I think it's 10th, 11th of April. They're running it through, and there's DJs, there's bars.
That's right. Most
of the action. So when you walk into the NGV, it's at the very back of the NGV, and there's food you can buy. There's wine. It's sort of it's an interesting mix of kind of boozing and culture, because you sort of go there and you can smash a couple of glasses of red, and then suddenly you veer out and walk through some Monets and some Van Goghs, and it's kind of trippy. Like one moment you're drinking beers and having pulled pork rolls, and the next moment you're walking through priceless 18th century Dutch masterpieces. It's kind of it's a really cool concept, and I think the NGV have done a cracking job of trying to get a new generation of people through the doors and getting them into the NGV, because it's an amazing collection. I mean, a lot of people may not know the NGV is actually Australia's oldest art gallery. It dates back to roughly the 1860s, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason it's called the National Gallery of Victoria is because at the time it was the first gallery in Australia. So even though it's the Gallery of Victoria, they called it the National Gallery because it was the first gallery in Australia. So it's actually quite an institution. But the Friday nights are fantastic.
Yeah, I've done the Friday nights, I think once. It was a couple of years ago, but I had a heap of fun. I had a pretty big hangover the morning after, but it was good. I loved it.
Yeah. It's very often you wake up the next day and go, wow, those Van Goghs, they really hit me for six, like it's
God,
it's a really fun night.
Would you recommend tourists going to Queen Vic Market?
Yeah, look, I do love the Queen Vic. I mean, I think it's a bit of a battle for me between South Melbourne markets and QV. I think for me, look, the Queen Vic markets are the biggest, they're the oldest, and they're one of the kind of tourist must-dos. But I think if you have got the time, South Melbourne markets are worth checking out because I think they're I'm probably going to get hate mail for this. I think they're a much more functional market than Queen Vic. I really enjoy going to South Melbourne markets, especially if you go there. So on Sundays, the markets close about 4 o'clock. Now, if you get there about 3 o'clock, a lot of the vendors are selling their wares dirt cheap. So you can go there and pick up a whole bunch of like steaks and fruits and like prepackaged pastas and things like that. And everything's massively discounted. So my wife and I, we used to do this a lot before our first son was born. But we've got to go back there. And you go there on a Sunday, you load up on really, really cheap produce, and then you just head to one of the many wine or restaurant bars that's sort of inside the markets, and then have a bit of an early dinner. So I think go to QV because they are the QV markets, but I think it is worth going to the South Melbourne market as well. I think that they're often overlooked. When people from out of town say you've got to go to QV. And look, QV do the markets Wednesday nights running through the summer, and they're an absolute must-do. I think if you are a tourist from out of town, definitely check the listings to see what Queen Vic is doing at night time, because those Wednesday night markets used to be called the Suzuki night markets. I'm not sure if they're still called that, but yeah, that would be one of my favourite things to go and check out.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't get down to the South Melbourne market as much as what I want to.
Yeah. And it's a location thing, right? Because because Melbourne is, Melbourne is really, it's a little bit like London in that it's kind of a city of villages. So if you live in the southeast, you're not going to go to QV markets. And
no way.
For us living in the west, we're in a bit of a unique situation because, our closest markets would be Footscray markets, which are brilliant and full of all kinds of, because Footscray, your listeners may not know, is the western suburbs in general are a real kind of melting pot of different cultures, and there's a really big Vietnamese community out there. There's a big Ethiopian community, and it's the markets are just a fantastic place for all kinds of weird and wonderful vegetables and produce. But it's really easy for those living in the inner west to get to South Melbourne markets via the freeway. So from where we live 6K west, and we can get to South Melbourne markets in about 15 minutes in the car, or we can get to Footscray markets in probably about the same period of time. So it's actually not a massive barrier. But yeah, for most people, if you live in the north, you'll stay in the north, you'll go to QV, or depending how far north, you might go to, say, Preston markets instead. So, Melbourne's blessed with so many of these markets around.
What would be easier for a tourist? Obviously, Queen Vic Market's right in the middle of the city, pretty much, or in the north of the city centre, of the city square. And how would they take a tram?
Yep, so you can. You can get a tram directly up Elizabeth Street, straight to QV markets. Look, yeah, I think that's probably half the attraction with QV. It is easy to get to. For most tourists, I imagine most people are staying in the city, or they might be getting an Airbnb, maybe just outside the city, maybe in a place like Fitzroy or Carlton or North Melbourne. Mm-hmm. But it is easy to get to via tram, or if you do want to grab an Uber or a taxi, depending where you're staying, obviously, but it is really just directly north of the city. You could. I've even said to people, if it's a nice day and you don't have any, if you haven't got a fully packed itinerary of things you want to do, just walk it. You can. Melbourne. The city grid is it's 2 miles long and 1 mile high, so it's not a huge grid. So you can easily kind of walk from one end to the other, and it's nice and flat, and there's plenty of things to see along the way. So get the tram or get an Uber if you really want to sort of max out your experiences. But otherwise, it's pretty easy to walk to.
With the Queen Vic Market, I heard that they built over a cemetery.
Yes, they did.
So strange.
the car park is actually built on an old graveyard, which the last time I heard about this, because they're in the process of expanding the Queen Vic markets, because a lot of the sheds are kind of getting on to 100 years old, and they want to extend the car park capacity, but it's problematic because they literally just poured concrete. This is going back a long time ago. They just poured concrete over the top of this graveyard and just stopped talking about it. But it's kind of one of these worst kept secrets about the markets, that it's just it's a pretty horrible thing.
It is pretty horrible. Hey, what do you think's the best way to see Melbourne from above?
Oh, okay. Well, we actually did this a couple of years ago. You can get a hot air balloon. There's a few different companies that provide the service, but it's a brilliant way to get a bird's eye of the city. The one that we did years ago started off in the north and then took off, and you're up for a couple of hours, and then you land it's just outside the Royal Botanical Gardens.
Oh yeah,
and it includes like a breakfast in the morning after you land. But I mean that's a fantastic way to see the city. Another experience I came across recently was you can actually hire one of those old 1920s planes from Essendon Airport, and really? You can go on one of these plane rides over Melbourne. And it's I'm actually just struggling to remember the name of the company, but you get into. I'll give it to you so you can put it in the show notes after. But yeah, you essentially just jump in one of these planes. They give you champagne, and you sort of do this joy flight around the city, and then come back again. But I can't believe I forgot the name of the company. But yeah, I'll give it to you after. But there are some cool ways to kind of see the city from above.
What do you think if people go up the top of the Eureka Sky Deck?
Yeah, well, look, and that's probably the safest way to see the city, and that's Eureka Sky Deck just in on South Bank. Yeah. So you can go up to the top, get a coffee, and have some fantastic views. There's also a part of Eureka Sky Deck called the Edge Experience, which I think it costs about 18. You have done it, yeah. I think it's about 18, 19 bucks from memory. Yeah, it's cool though, right? So it's like this giant glass cube, and you kind of stand in it.
Yeah, but when you're in there, actually, I probably shouldn't give it away because I want people to enjoy it. But it's quite a good experience.
Yep. No. I mean, I won't say anything more than if you're not up for air ballooning or plane rides, then definitely, yeah, I think the Eureka Sky Deck is a safe way to get a pretty cracking view of the city.
Yeah, I'd rather do the Sky Deck than air ballooning. I just hear horror stories of air ballooning.
Yeah, look, I've done it once. My wife's done it a couple of times.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think it's a bit like anything. The risk of anything happening is pretty low, but when it does happen, it's all over the news.
Yeah, true.
I mean, a lot of these I think the only thing I found hard about the hot air ballooning was you just got to get up at the crack of dawn. Like that's the thing that scares me the most is getting up at 5:30 in the morning. I'm a better morning person than I used to be, but the early mornings are probably the thing that freaks me out the most.
Yeah. Have you got any other places or things that you enjoy doing that you would tell a traveller to make sure they see if they come to Melbourne? I've got a few things up my sleeve.
Look, I think, yeah, sure. Look, besides obviously the city, I mean, I think what a lot of tourists end up doing is they end up staying in the city, exploring the laneways, and then heading out on their day trips to, say, Great Ocean Road or the Goldfields or Daylesford, and then they leave. And I think it's a bit of a shame because the suburbs of Melbourne really have some of the best bars and restaurants. And I think, if you are going to explore any other part of Melbourne apart from the city, you need to go to Fitzroy. So Fitzroy, for a bit of background, it was Melbourne's first suburb. So the streets of Fitzroy were first laid out starting in 1839. So it's actually a really old part of the city. When you walk through Fitzroy, you really feel that history. A lot of the old terrace buildings have been retained. And, of course, the irony is that Fitzroy for a very long time was an absolute slum. And then over time, sort of starting off in the 19 sort of 70s, give or take, the student crowd suddenly realised that, there was a huge amount of housing stock, 2 k's north of the city, and it was really cheap. And so, of course, they started moving in en masse, and prices started rising, and artists and architects and eventually movie stars started moving in. So now these days, Melbourne is among, I think last time I checked, it was the fourth most expensive place to live in Melbourne, sort of average house price of around 1.4 million bucks. But it's a very cool part of town. There's some fantastic street art. If anyone wants to see some of the city's best street art, Fitzroy is a must-do. The bars in Fitzroy are fantastic. They've got everything from really cool cocktail bars like the Everleigh, the Black Pearl, which was named one of the world's best cocktail bars a couple of years ago. Then through to those really, Black Pearl, just north of Johnson Street, the Black Pearl.
Johnson Street, yeah.
Then one of my favourite things about Fitzroy, just some of those really old, beautiful, comfortable pubs. One of my favourite things to do in Fitzroy on a Sunday afternoon is go to a place called the Napier Hotel, which is just directly opposite the Fitzroy Town Hall. Built in 1866, 65, 66. It's kind of the unofficial home ground for the well, they are the Brisbane Lions now, but in the mid 1990s, what was the Fitzroy Lions, who were an AFL team, merged with the Brisbane Bears, and they relocated up to Brisbane, and that's where they've been ever since. But for the supporters in Fitzroy, they've always maintained that they're still the Fitzroy Lions. And so the Napier Hotel is like the official kind of home ground for the supporters to go and watch their team play. So you walk in and it's really beautiful and comfortable, and there's it's got a great atmosphere, and there's a ton of Lions paraphernalia on the walls, and they've got some really good food and craft beers, and it's just a really cracking. It's not gastro. It still retains its roots, but it's just beautifully restored, and it's just a really comfortable, like a well worn in pair of shoes. They just sort of fit perfectly. It's a great pub. And then, of course, the food in Fitzroy is brilliant as well. There's a huge mixture of food, everything from Spanish to Thai. There's a lot of really good vegetarian in Fitzroy. So if any of your listeners are looking for good vegetarian eats, Fitzroy's got some fantastic places. So as a suburb, it's just it's a wonderful collection of all those things about Melbourne that we love.
Yeah, true. Fitzroy's brilliant. I've been going there since probably a teenager, which is mid-90s. Late 90s. So yeah, it's a place I've always thought of. If I've got someone out of town, they're visiting me, I'll take them to Brunswick Street, for instance, or Smith Street, because there's just countless amounts of really good restaurants, bars, and clubs and so forth. But it's fantastic. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Fitzroy is fantastic. I would definitely go to Fitzroy if I was a traveller in Melbourne. Now, I would also, if you're in Melbourne and you want to see some cathedrals, this is just me talking about some nice things, some nice cultural places to visit. If you're into architecture, St. Pat's Cathedral and St. Paul's Cathedral.
Absolutely.
So that's if you want to get a bit of culture into you.
Yeah, look, I think I suppose it depends where you come from, right? I mean, when I was traveling around Europe in sort of 2011, 2012, I just saw so many churches. We started calling them ABCs, another bloody church,
another bloody church,
or later on we started calling them AFCs. But I think if you come from a place where you've got just a lot of cathedrals and churches, you might not necessarily want to come to Melbourne and see our 120-year-old churches. But no, but look, I'm kind of taking the piss. But no, St. Paul's Cathedral and St. Pat's are the Protestant or the Anglican and the Catholic cathedrals are both very beautiful. They're especially St. Pat's. I mean, it's a beautiful old bluestone building located in the northeast of the city. It's there's a funny little architectural element. Just speaking of architecture, so St. Pat's is a Gothic cathedral, Gothic in style, and there's one of the features of Gothic cathedrals are gargoyles that kind of jut out from the side of the cathedral, and they're intended to scare away bad spirits. And one of the gargoyles actually bears a very strong resemblance to one of our former premiers, Jeff Kennett. Kennett was a premier of Victoria for about 5-6 years in the 90s, and a very highly controversial figure. Still quite involved in Melbourne life in a diminished capacity. He's the chairman of the Hawthorn Football Club, and he's kind of a general man about town. But when he was premier, he came in at a time when Victoria's economy was in the toilet. We were known as the Rust Bucket State, And as a conservative leaning premier, he made a lot of decisions to cut costs, and the public health and education sector were just pared back to the bone, and public transport was closed down. But then at the same time, he did a lot of good things for Melbourne. He brought in the Formula One we stole from Adelaide, and that's been with us ever since. He really turned the city into an events city. So on South Bank, there's the Melbourne Exhibition Centre, which is also affectionately known as Jeff's Shed, after he built that. So there's kind of good and bad with Jeff Kennett. But anyway, for the people who hated Jeff Kennett, and there were many people on that side of the fence, one guy in particular was a stonemason called Tom Carson, and he decided to change the face of one of the gargoyles on the side of St. Patrick's to look like Jeff Kennett. And so when you go to St. Pat's, it's just on the side of the cathedral towards the back. And when Jeff was told that, this stonemason had rendered a gargoyle in his image, of course, Jeff Kennett, having a very healthy ego, wasn't offended at all. Apparently he's quoted to have said that not being of the Catholic faith but sympathetic to it, I find it's highly appropriate. So he was actually quite chuffed at the fact that he'd been immortalised in stone, even though it was meant to be a bit of an insult and a slap in the face.
I'm sure. That's so funny. I've got to have a look at that next time I'm at St. Pat's Cathedral. Now,
yeah, definitely check it out.
Yeah, no, bloody oath, I will. If you're in Melbourne, right, and you want something to eat, have you got any favourite restaurants?
Yeah, depends what your budget is. So I think, if we're talking, and that's one of the great things about Melbourne. If you're talking date night, you're spoiled for choice. If you're willing to loosen the purse strings, there's some. To make it easy, I'd probably say head down Flinders Lane. There's a ton of really good restaurants there that are a little bit higher priced, but certainly are there for some of those more special occasions. Places like Supernormal, which is a fantastic Japanese restaurant, Izard, which is again one of those iconic restaurants in Melbourne, very well known and again expensive but very prestigious. But there's a couple of little gems there that aren't too expensive. So one of my favourite places on Flinders Lane is a place called Meatball and Wine Co. And they basically, the name kind of gives it away, but essentially you go there, they've got a fantastic wine list, and their core thing is that you choose your meatballs, and so whether that's lamb or whether that's beef, then you choose what they come with, so whether that's, say, pasta or like mashed potato or whatever base or polenta, and then you choose your dressing or sauce, and then you basically pair that with the wine, and it's such an awesome, simple concept. So there's some really good restaurants along Flinders Lane. If you're looking for something on the other end of the spectrum that's a little bit cheaper, there's actually a couple of really good all-you-can-eat places in the city. One of my favourite, because I work in the city and I go there all the time, is a vegetarian restaurant called Om. I think it's spelled OHM, I think it's spelled. And they do an all-you-can-eat vegetarian. I think it costs about $8-9. And it's kind of funny that they give you those like they give you one of those like silver tins. You probably see in like a World War II movie, like those canteen style, like trays, and they give you the tray and they load it up with rice and vegetable curry, and they give you some naan bread. And then it's very simple, like it's clean and simple and tasty, but it's no frills. And then once you're done, you just take it back to the front and they load it up again. And then if you want to go for a third, I've never got through 2 courses because they're actually quite decent serves. So yeah, you've got that super cheap element as well as everything else in between.
I reckon I've got a list of about 15 places that I enjoy going to.
Well, what's your favourite, mate? Have you got a go-to place for date nights, or?
I have a new go-to place now. Actually, no, I do have a date night place. It's Doc on Lygon Street. It's an Italian eatery.
Oh, okay.
Doc,
Yep.
DOC. And
DOC.
everyone
there,
there,
I know that one. Yep.
Everyone there is Italian. I think they get Italian workers from overseas, obviously on a holiday visa to work there, because they go through them, they turn them over, but they're always, diligent. They serve you fast. It's a really good quality food. You can get some great Italian beers there. And then what I do with my wife, so we'll eat there and then we'll go and watch a film at Nova Cinema.
Oh, cool.
That's our date night type thing.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, DOC is very famous. And I mean, yeah, Lygon. I mean, you mentioned Lygon Street. I mean, if you're looking for Italian food, you don't need to go too much further. Actually, one of my favourite. There's a cracking Italian restaurant in the city. I don't know if you've been there, called Il Bacaro. It's on Little Lonsdale Street or Little Collins Street. God, my memory's shocking today. I think it's Little Collins Street. So Il Bacaro, and I kind of stumbled across this place by chance because my wife and I were going to see we're going to see a comedy show, and I'd kind of like
comedy festival.
Yeah, and we were seeing a gig, and then me being a man and being horribly disorganized, I'd sort of got my timings all shit wrong, and then we had to kind of like we ended up getting to Il Bacaro, and like it was meant to be like a romantic dinner, and we were meant to have like an hour and a half and have a few courses and dessert and, you know, have some nice Chianti. And we ended up getting there and being like, we've got 20 minutes. Can you just give us the quickest meal you can and like just give us wine, just quick. So like I felt like a real dickhead, but like my poor wife was very patient with me. But it was an incredible meal, and I'm smashing this. I think I had a lamb ragu. I'm smashing this ragu, and I'm like going, I'm so sorry, in between like shoving pasta in my mouth. And we kept saying, we've got to come back here and have like a proper meal, because it is a beautiful restaurant and the food was exquisite. And like, I mean, as you'd expect, superb Italian wine list. But it was a little gem, and I had no idea it was there until I'd kind of started looking. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of good Italian outside of Lygon Street. And that was one that I found that I've you know, really a real highlight for me.
Well, another good Italian place is Lello Pasta Bar.
Oh yeah, Lane. Very good. Yeah, top choice. Yeah. And not too expensive either. It's
great people.
Oh, you know. Oh yeah, yep.
I love going there.
There's another one that's opened up. Actually, no, they haven't opened up. Tarzio was on Flinders Lane. They've actually relocated a bit further down Flinders Lane. So I don't know if you remember, there used to be a restaurant out on Flinders Lane called Merry Fortune, and they shut down maybe 9 months ago, and now Tarzio has moved into that building just around AC/DC Lane, kind of around there off Flinders, and they do really, really good Italian food. And again, it's one of those ones on Flinders that is actually pretty affordable, you know, that you can eat really, really well and, you know, not spend too much. You know, I mean, I think if you're spending more than $40-50 on food, you're going to be pretty full of Tarzio. So yeah, there's a couple of those little gems around the city.
Yeah. And a couple of other places that my wife and I like to go to, which I reckon a tourist should go to, is a Taiwanese institution called Din Tai Fung. We go there quite a lot.
In the car park?
For really nice dumplings. No, this one's in Chinatown, near Emporium, Din Tai Fung. It's very, very good. If you want a good burger, Grand Trailer Park, if you're in the city, on Burke Street. Really good American diner. They got the little diners set up inside, you know, the little caravan type setup.
Yeah, that's a great place, yeah. And actually just down from there, there's a good American barbecue place not far from Grand Trailer Park that does a lot of sort of smoked meats. But the other one I was going to say, when you mentioned the Thai place, there's another really good cheap eats place in the city called Soy 38. So it's SOI and then the number 38. It's in a place called McIlraith Place. It's technically in a car park right next to Myers Place. So Myers Place, for your listeners, is kind of like ground zero for the rebirth of Melbourne laneway renaissance. So hopefully Karina gave you all the background when she took you through there. If not, I might need to give her some training. But Myers Place was sort of like Melbourne's first laneway bar. Started in Myers Place in 1995. And then from there, this whole laneway bar culture kind of exploded. But right next to Myers Place, there's kind of this real ugly, horrible multi-story car park. But inside the car park, there's this cracking Thai restaurant called Soy 38, and it's super cheap. And you walk in, and it feels like a slice of Bangkok. It's quite amazing, and it's cash only, and it's just this weird little place in the city that does really good food, quick service. Like, you know, the kitchen's fully exposed, and But yeah, again, one of those like it's a really good like lunchtime spot. You know, if you're sort of looking for a really cheap, quick eats in the city, and you're kind of around that eastern part of the CBD, check out Soy 38. It's good eats.
Yeah, I know the place. I sometimes park in that car park, and the amount of times I've gone past Soy 38 because I'm actually going to a different restaurant, and I go, one day I've got to go here.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's really good. I mean, I work in a city not far from there, and it's a common lunchtime spot to go, particularly about a week before payday is usually when I'm going to Soy 38.
Oh, it's cheap as chips.
That's the one.
Chips. After you've eaten a little bit of food, you know, you've had a bit of a drink, or not too much of a drink, you obviously want to walk the city. So what do you think are some of the best walks to do in Melbourne? Obviously, we mentioned, you know, walking the laneways. One of the things I like doing is buying a coffee, walking around the city, exploring the graffiti on the walls and the laneways like Hosier Lane, or Hosier, I never get it right. Hosier. There's some great things to do. Also, I think the stroll from Federation Square across to Flinders Street Station and walking your way up towards St Kilda Road over Princess Bridge is nice as well. And then you can walk all the way up to the National Gallery, the Arts Centre, which we've mentioned, and you can see King's Domain, Botanic Gardens, a Shrine of Remembrance, all that walk from that part of Melbourne, that southern part of the Melbourne CBD is just fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite walks is the Federation Square, and then walking your way up towards the old Treasury building and then the State Parliament of Victoria. So State Parliament of Victoria is on the eastern part of the CBD, and Federation Square is pretty much bang south. So you can kind of walk your way, walk in a northeast direction, and you'll go through all these cool little laneways like AC/DC and Duckboard and Myers Place. And then when you get to the old Treasury building on the eastern part of the city, that and the State Parliament are two of our most beautiful old buildings. The old Treasury sort of dates back to the 1860s, and State Parliament was mid-1850s. So they're quite beautiful old buildings. And then, of course, if you keep going a little bit further north, you've got the Princess Theatre on Spring Street, which is a beautiful old building. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And then along Spring Street, there's a couple of beautiful wine bars, which you can stop in and have a bit of a drink al fresco. And then from there, you can then turn left into Little Bourke Street, which is just outside of Chinatown. And you can do a bit of a walk from the eastern part on Spring Street on Little Bourke Street and kind of just walk all the way down Chinatown, really until you get to sort of Swanston. And then from Swanston, you can then turn east and then head up towards the State Library, grab a coffee, chill out there on the lawns. It's a really nice way to kind of see some of those, more iconic buildings and some of those cool little tucked away laneways.
I've got a left field walk for the tourists that come to Melbourne, Westgate Park, kind of closer to where you are.
Yeah, I've done that before. Yep.
That's a great park because they've got that unusually pink lake that's formed by the algae in the summer months.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's a good
actually,
one.
It's funny because I did some volunteer work there last year to do some rehabilitation on some of the plants. And it's funny because I live in the West, and I'd actually never been to Westgate Park until I went on this work mandated volunteer day. And then I was like, wow, this is actually right on my doorstep. But it's a beautiful little park. And because when you drive over the Westgate, you'll see the park on the left hand side with the unusually pink lake. But it's and look, that's one of the best things about Melbourne, right? It's all these fantastic parks. I mean, we are quite a green city. Yeah, I mean, obviously the Fitzroy Gardens to the east of the city near the State Parliament are beautiful and a very popular lunchtime spot. You've then got the Flagstaff Gardens to the north of the city, which, I used to play mixed netball there in the on the courts there many years ago. But the gardens are fantastic. Then, of course, to the south, you've got the Royal Botanical Gardens. There's just a ton of places to escape the heat in the warmer months and grab a spot and put down a picnic and just enjoy the scenery.
And you've got the Carlton Gardens, which is a World Heritage Site too, a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, that's it. The gardens are beautiful, and then just inside the gardens, of course, would be a shame not to mention the Royal Exhibition Building,
Absolutely,
right smack bang in the middle of the gardens, which were built in 1880 to host the Melbourne exhibition, which was kind of like the World Fair. And this was, Melbourne was founded in 1835, and then it was quite amazing because the gold rush then hit in 1851, and so we went from this sort of small little village and collection of mud huts on the Yarra to this global mega city by the 1880s. And so we decided to host this giant exhibition. And world fairs aren't really a thing anymore, but back in the late 19th, early 20th century, they were sort of these marquee events where cities would host them, and you'd invite delegates from around the world, and you'd show off the wares of your city. And so we had something like 2 million people come to Melbourne in a 6-month period, and it was all in this. And the Royal Exhibition Building, as they are now, is a World Heritage site, and the first building in Australia to be given World Heritage protection as well. And it's actually about a quarter of its original size when it was first built. But it's a beautiful building. The dome itself is actually based on the Duomo, which in Florence, designed by Brunelleschi. So if anyone's been to Florence, and then yes, it's actually a very, very similar design. So, and then one of the other things, actually, probably a good time to segue to events, because Melbourne, if nothing else, is an event city. And one of my favourite events in Melbourne, if you're here in May, is the Great Australian Beer Spectacular, which takes place inside the Royal Exhibition Building.
Love that.
And it's or GABS for short. To explain how much I love this festival, you need to understand that I went last year when my son was only 6 weeks old, and my wife was a little bit sick, and I still managed to go to GABS, and I'm eternally grateful to my wife for her patience and understanding in me going to that festival, because it probably wasn't the best time for me to go. But it is an amazing festival because you're inside this beautiful old building, and there's so much history. And then they lay it out kind of in a Oktoberfest style, with lots of kind of shared tables, and you can try. There's hundreds of different beers, and many of the beers are made especially for the festival. And they've got a Ferris wheel inside the building, which I don't know how much of a good idea that is when everyone's drinking some very high alcoholic content beer. And there's fantastic food. And so, it's just particularly in May when, the weather's really cold and miserable, and it's just not it's not the best time to be in Melbourne. And they've just got this event, and it's just like, it's such a, I've only missed a couple of GABs over the years, and it is one of my favorite festivals.
I'm going to have to get myself there.
Oh, you'll love it, Ben. It's amazing. It's incredible. Go, because when you buy tickets, you buy them for a session. So you'll get I think it's like a 4 or 5 hour pass. So you go for like an early afternoon session or a night session. So go for the night session on the Friday or the Saturday, because then you can finish and then walk across into Fitzroy, and then if you want to, you can then continue your night, because it's like a 5-minute walk to Johnson Street, and there's a whole bunch of really good Spanish bars, and so it ends up just becoming a fantastic night.
Wow, I've got to do that. And a couple of other good events on in Melbourne. I think in March you've got the Comedy Festival, as well as the Grand Prix in March.
Yeah, it's a busy one. You got the Comedy Festival, I think, is the world's third biggest festival. I think it's.
And we get some good people out.
Yeah. And I think the good thing with the Comedy Festival is, there's the big name acts that come through, and you can always pay $80, $90, $100 to see some of the world's best comedians. But on the same token, there's plenty of acts that are only $5 each or $10 each. Often they're some of the better ones. Like we've been to festival gigs before, and you always kind of have to book in your favorite acts because they sell out really quick. But I remember one year we went. I won't name comedian names, but we paid a reasonable amount of money to see a comedian who ended up just being god awful. And I booked the tickets, and everyone looked at me and was like, why did you take us to this shit show of an event? And then we ended up going to like a $5 gig. I think actually it might have been like $10, $15 to see like 3 comedians back to back or whatever. And it was one of the best events we went to. So I think, again, playing into that spirit of discovery, that's what Melbourne's all about. I think with the Comedy Festival, pick your marquee events you're going to go to, but but leave yourself some time to either see a show before or see a show after, and just wing it. Like there's all these, there's these dudes like giving out flyers, say, come and see my show, and we've done that before, and just go, oh yeah, cool. It's like $5. What have I got to lose? They're all these up and coming comedians, and they're really, they're often they're really good. They just don't have a name. So yeah, don't be a snob. Go and see some of the cheaper events, and you may end up having as good, if not a better time than the big name acts.
Yeah, I think I've seen a no name at the Greek Club. I think it's the Greek Club.
Yeah,
that was great because I didn't know who they were, and I think I did something similar to you. I just grabbed a pamphlet, just went, oh, okay, I'll do it, and just booked it. I think I would have booked it online, but yeah, that's a heap of fun. I love finding new comedians or just watching people I haven't watched before because you don't know what to expect as well. And in regards to your comment about the comedian that you didn't like, it's happened to me as well. When I thought, oh, this guy's going to be great, and it wasn't that great.
Yeah. I mean. Yeah. I mean, we've seen him a couple of times. Andy Zoltman, we've seen him a couple of times in Melbourne. He's got he's got an amazing podcast called The Bugle. It's kind of very dry, witty humour, and it's very topical, and he covers news events. I've been trying to get Andy to come on my tour actually for a while. So Andy, if you're listening, we'd love you to come on the tour, mate. But it is a bit hit and miss, and you strike some gold. Other times you don't. But I think with events and festivals in general, I think when you get to Melbourne, one of the first things you should do is actually just look up like what's happening this month, because there's always, I mean, particularly in that summer period from sort of December through to March, April, there seems to be a different festival happening every weekend, and not all of them in the city. There's some cracking festivals happening in the regional areas. And I mean, I suppose we haven't spoken much about day trips, but it's one of the biggest strengths of Melbourne is that, you've got a city that obviously has a huge amount to offer in the city and then some of these surrounding suburbs. But then, you've got these amazing day trip locations, and many of them are, like an hour and a half away by train or car. So we're very lucky that we get to live in a place like that where we can just head out for a weekend. But if you're traveling to Melbourne, you can fit a huge amount in a day. And you're really only, in transit for maybe a couple of hours trying to get there. Particularly if you're looking to plan some of those day trips or weekends away, Visit Victoria's got a fantastic interactive website where you can look at the different regions. They'll give you breakdowns of what's there to do, towns to visit. I think because there is so much to do outside of Melbourne and regional Victoria, I think Visit Victoria does a great job in helping show how you get there, what to do while you're there, why you'd want to go there. So that's another really great resource I'd check out.
Hello, Ben from the future here. I'm just going to do a little bit of editing. I want to ask Ben, what are some great resources to look at if you're a tourist coming to Melbourne?
Time Out Melbourne is a must-do to see what's happening around the city for good bars. And they've got some fantastic bar and restaurant guides and events happening. The other two really good ones, of course, are Broadsheet and Urban List. So I think they're kind of the holy. Oh, there's also Concrete Playground. It's probably the other one of the big four. That's right. Between Concrete Playground, Urban List, Broadsheet, and Time Out, you've got 99.9% of the city covered.
Well, thanks a lot for listening to part one of my chat with Ben from Drinking History Tours. I had a great time chatting to him for nearly close to 2 hours, so that's why I've cut it into two parts. So be sure to look out for part two of the Melbourne Travel Guide in a few weeks' time. Remember, you can always follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just look up Travelman Podcast, Travelman Pod on Twitter, you know the deal. And also, please just try and subscribe and download the podcast on any podcast app that you're listening to me on. That's really good for me. And if you want to rate and review on Apple iTunes, that would be cool too. Now, before I go, I just have a special shout out for Jason, who sent me a few messages in relation to a couple of episodes I've done. The first message he had was something he learned in the Paul Papadimitriou episode, which I think everyone should listen to. It's a two-parter. Fantastic. Jason now realizes why he cries or gets highly emotional when he watches films in the airplane. So if you don't know the reason for this, then I'll try and explain it. really in layman's terms. The reason is due to a decreased or lack of oxygen in the cabin. So saying this, you're more likely to get more or over emotional than being on ground level where the oxygen is at a normal level. I don't know if that made any sense, but that's kind of the reason. Just do some exploration yourself if you want to find out a little bit more about that, because it's quite an interesting topic. Jason also sent me another message about my UNESCO World Heritage episode with Michael Turtle. He loved how I started off getting my bearings in place and then went whammo and hit the mark. He liked how I opened Michael up so that he'd give the listener, I guess, a valuable insight into visiting UNESCO sites. It was a fantastic episode I did with Michael. Listen to that one too. And thanks a bunch, Jason, my travel buddy. I love all the positivity that comes my way from you. You're one of my biggest fans, so appreciate it, mate. Keep it coming. I love it. Thank you. And I'll see you on the next episode.